On this Thursday night, from vacation to resignation, Ontario's finance minister back from Barbados.
A dumb mistake.
And out of cabinet, the apology from Rod Phillips. New details on Ottawa's new mandate for anyone flying into Canada, when it takes effect, and why there's so much confusion. And the pandemic proving to be a real party pooper.
More used to seeing it, packed.
Subdued celebrations ring in 2021 and bid good riddance to 2020.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Sonia Diol.
Good evening and thanks very much for joining us this New Year's Eve. 2020 is thankfully nearly over and many will be ringing in the new year wishing for a better year ahead. But the pandemic is overshadowing celebrations tonight. Canadians are facing restrictions like never before and the tough reality that we still have a long road to recovery. Here's a look at why the numbers are so worrying. Canada is seeing a sharp surge in infections, averaging around 6,000 new cases per day. They're largely driven by the two biggest provinces. Quebec reported a record number of single-day infections, and Ontario shattered its previous high, reporting more than 3,000 new cases. ICU admissions also reaching a pandemic record in Ontario. Premier Doug Ford is among the leaders facing growing pressure to curb the crisis. Today, his finance minister stepped down hours after arriving home from a Caribbean vacation that went against pandemic guidelines. Travis Dhanraj is following the developing details in our top story tonight.
The walk of shame through Pearson International Airport for a politician who clearly knows he did wrong. But Rod Phillips' mea culpa?
A significant error in judgment, a dumb mistake.
Was not enough to save his job as Ontario's finance minister. Premier Ford releasing a statement Thursday afternoon. Today, following my conversation with Rod Phillips, I have accepted his resignation as Ontario's Minister of Finance. At a time when the people of Ontario have sacrificed so much, today's resignation is a demonstration that our government takes seriously our obligation to hold ourselves to a higher standard.
Very, very difficult.
The optics of a jet-setting finance minister on a 2.5-week-long pleasure trip, only returning to a province he helped put into lockdown after the story became public, clearly became too much for the Premier to manage.
I can tell you I'm very upset.
He could have put a stop to it a couple of weeks ago. Instead, he chose to basically help Rod Phillips keep the secret that he was out of the country. And the only reason that we're dealing with this now is because they got caught.
The optics are horrible. And I don't know what the finance minister was thinking going off to, an island vacation where the rich and famous go to play while we're in the middle of a crisis.
So after losing his cabinet position, drawing the ire of Ontarians, and drawing international attention, what now for Phillips?
Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody makes errors in judgment. This was a pretty big one. But if he wants a future in politics, I think he did the only thing that he could do.
That future remains unclear right now. One thing that is clear, when it comes to the big decisions for Ontario, Rod Phillips will be watching from the backbenches. Travis Dhanraj, Global News.
Travellers arriving into Canada will now be required to provide a negative COVID-19 test as of January 7th. That date given this afternoon by the federal government, a day after announcing the new travel restriction. As Richard Zussman now reports, airlines are scrambling to comply with only a week left to prepare.
Delayed flight.
We have been trying to get the government to work with us over the past 6 or 7 months in developing a clear, concise testing strategy.
The head of the National Airlines Council of Canada is frustrated. After months of advocating for a testing strategy, Wednesday's federal decision to require proof of a negative COVID-19 test from air passengers came as a surprise.
And the whole point of that exercise is to avoid a rushed approach and the confusion that will now create. And unfortunately, that is the approach we are now seeing.
Late on Thursday, the federal government providing some details. As of January 7th, all air passengers 5 years and older will be required to have the negative test before traveling into Canada from another country. The test must be taken within 72 hours of flying, and the negative result must be presented to the airline before boarding.
I'm concerned that Canadians who are abroad in jurisdictions that may not have easy access to PCR tests might have problems.
Anyone coming back will still be required to quarantine for 14 days. The provinces are supportive of the testing measure, but Quebec and British Columbia have repeatedly raised concerns Ottawa is not doing enough to ensure those in isolation after international travel are actually staying there.
The more that can be done to support people and maintain that 14-day quarantine, because it's not easy, but also to remind people that that is their absolute obligation to do so, would be helpful.
British Columbia and other provinces specifically concerned about the fact that those that are under quarantine are not getting frequent enough phone calls from the federal government. Especially important now that the COVID-19 variant is here in Canada. Sonia?
Richard Zussman in Victoria, thank you. The Moderna vaccine is now being rolled out in the Northwest Territories. Residents and staff at a seniors' home in Yellowknife are among the first in Canada's north to get this new vaccine, which is shipped and stored more easily than the one from Pfizer-BioNTech. Nunavut and Yukon are expected to begin rolling out the Moderna vaccine in the coming weeks. In BC, many who work in the hospitality industry are frustrated with a last-minute provincial health order to move up that last call for a drink. Restaurants, bars and stores have been ordered to stop selling alcohol at 8 p.m. tonight. The aim is to prevent big gatherings and irresponsible behaviour, often linked to late-night drinking.
This decision could force some people into bankruptcy. And we can help industry prepare for that, and people can take time to plan something different for their business to help keep customers safe if you give us a bit of notice.
Alberta has become the first province to officially say the NHL can play in its arenas next year. All teams will have to follow government health guidelines, as well as rules outlined in the league's return to play plan. There are 4 other provinces with NHL teams. The league's deputy commissioner believes the league can play in all Canadian markets. The federal government has also issued an exemption to the mandatory 14-day quarantine period for NHL players and staff returning to Canada for training camps, citing national interest. Americans will be ringing in the new year overwhelmed by a pandemic that has now claimed more than 352,000 lives. Doctors are urging people once again to stay home. For the first time, the iconic celebration in New York's Times Square will be eerily empty without the usual crowds of spectators. As Jennifer Johnson now reports, COVID-19 has led to the deadliest year in the country's history.
Happy New Year! The iconic crystal ball set to drop at midnight in New York's Times Square. But this year, there will be no spectators to cheer it on.
New Year's Eve, hopefully you're never going to see this again. Times Square like this.
1 million people who usually pack the streets have been told to stay home because of COVID-19. But the show will go on.
The tradition remains the same. We're still going to see this beautiful Waterford crystal ball lowered as the entire world counts down together, united with a single wish for a good new year for everyone.
Just a few dozen frontline workers have been invited to attend the event in a city that's projected to lose $1.5 billion in tourism sales for 2021. But with most hospitals filled up again, officials say they had no choice.
I'm COVID fatigued. I get it. But this is a war. And you can't get fatigued before the enemy gets fatigued.
According to Kaiser Health statistics, 2020 has become America's deadliest year in history, topping 3 million, including over 340,000 COVID-19 deaths. Doctors are encouraging much quieter New Year's Eve celebrations as the virus continues its rampage, even if someone says they've tested negative.
The biggest misconception of this pandemic is that I got tested today and therefore I'm safe tomorrow or the next day. Remember that the incubation period is 2 to 14 days.
Healthcare workers say those insisting on celebrating with others need to take precautions.
Let's all wear masks and do social distancing. That will help bend the curve and make the new year a happier one.
But experts say with 85 million people traveling over the holidays, the next surge is coming. Most are predicting January 2021 will be the country's deadliest month since the pandemic began. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
The FBI is investigating a Wisconsin hospital worker who spoiled more than 500 doses of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine by deliberately removing vials from a pharmacy fridge. The incident happened over the weekend at the Aurora Medical Center in Grafton, that is north of Milwaukee. The employee has now been fired. There's no word yet on a motive. Well, it's the end of an era for the UK as the country is now officially broken away from the European Union. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson signed the post-Brexit trade deal with the EU on Wednesday. It means that Britain now has economically and practically left the 27-nation bloc. It's been 4.5 years since Britain voted in a referendum to leave the EU. Johnson says the UK now has freedom in its hands.
So you are having your cake and eating it?
You said it. We will be able to do things differently. We'll be able to find ways of being more competitive if we want to be.
The deal grants the UK access to one of the largest free trade blocs in the world. In return, Britain has agreed to what's known as the level playing field, which means following environmental and workers' standards laid out by the European Union. Coming up, a family's heartbreaking holiday, the shocking conditions they witnessed inside one long-term care home. Welcome back. An Ontario family is speaking out after witnessing what it calls a distressing situation inside a Niagara Falls long-term care home. Oakwood Park Lodge is dealing with a major COVID-19 outbreak. More than 225 residents and staff have been infected in just over 2 weeks. 24 people have died. Morgan Campbell reports.
This is how Gibson Penny and his family spent their Boxing Day, holding their loved one as she took her last breath.
I can even talk to her, say one last goodbye.
This is how the Penny family would prefer to remember Yvette Brock, a kind, selfless woman with a creative streak. The 81-year-old lived at Oakwood Park Lodge in Niagara Falls. Her family says the experience there was an ordeal, with conflicting reports about her medical condition and miscommunication. Recounting the experience through the front door of their Oshawa home, the Pennies, who are in isolation, say they couldn't believe what they saw behind the walls of this long-term care home.
When we left, there was a resident in the hallway in a wheelchair asking us to bring her water, and it was like a ghost town. You know, there was no staff in sight.
The pair say they also witnessed a resident sleeping in the lobby. The COVID-19 outbreak has led to the deaths of more than 20 residents and infected dozens of others. Niagara Health recently stepped in and took over management of the home, owned and operated by ConMed Healthcare Group, which also owns Millennium Trail Manor, where 15 seniors have died with the virus. A joint statement from Oakwood Park Lodge and Niagara Health says they have assessed the home, writing, "Our hospital team is working closely with the Oakwood Lodge team on a number of priority areas." This ranges from clinical care to managing personal protective equipment to infection prevention and enhanced cleaning. During a briefing at Queen's Park Wednesday, the Associate Medical Officer of Health explained that military and Red Cross supports are on the table.
These are all considerations. I can't tell you the exact breaking point.
A spokesperson with the Ministry of Long-Term Care reiterated that the province is recruiting staff to help assist the sector, which members of the opposition say should have been done sooner.
If we would have invested that money, if we would have invested in PSWs, they'd still be here. They'd be able to celebrate Christmas with their family.
The Penny family only decided to go public with their story in an effort to shed light on the plight faced by not just residents, but staff working in long-term care.
Where was this help?
Morgan Campbell, Global News.
Sad news out of Ontario, where its patient ombudsman has died in a tragic accident. Kathy Fuchs assumed her role in July during the pandemic. Today, Premier Doug Ford praised her as a champion who fought tirelessly to improve the patient and family caregiver experience in our healthcare system. Still ahead, Nova Scotians trying to heal from a year that's given them one tragedy after another. Well, 2020 has been a tough year for many of us, but for Nova Scotians, it's been especially hard. The province is not only in the middle of a pandemic, as Ross Lord explains, it's struggling to come to terms with the year's other heartbreaking tragedies on land and at sea.
The natural beauty of Nova Scotia is undisturbed, but the soul of this province has been darkened. The anxiety felt by all Canadians in 2020 can't compare to the blanket of grief here, an anguish that's stricken everyone.
I've cried more in the last 10 months than certainly I did in the first 7 years of my job, but really probably ever.
Mourning dozens of deaths from COVID-19 and a string of other tragedies.
RCMP are requesting more ambulances, probably one more coming and then at least one more standby.
Only a few weeks into the pandemic came April's hideous massacre. A denturist, dressed up like a Mountie, killed 13 people in the tiny village of Portapic. He killed 9 more people in other communities the next day before being shot dead by police. This grief counselor says devastation from the slaughter is unshakable.
It's changed. I feel it when I'm out on my walks. There's a beauty and a sadness all intertwined now.
Before the end of April, tragedy struck again. A Navy helicopter based in Halifax crashed off the coast of Greece. All 6 people on board were killed in the prime of their lives, including Navy Sub-Lieutenant Abigail Cobra.
Then there's the more personal items, walking her down the aisle when she decides to get married, first child, those types of things that just won't ever happen.
Less than 3 weeks after the helicopter went down, a Canadian Forces Snowbird's jet crashed after takeoff in Kamloops, BC. The crash killed Captain Jen Casey, a Nova Scotia native working as a public affairs officer.
2020 is a year I'd like to forget, and we're not even halfway there yet.
In September, more distress, this time in the Nova Scotia lobster fishery. Indigenous fishers, exercising their treaty rights, were confronted by commercial harvesters.
If that were true, then why are you not on our side? Why are you not helping us?
Commercial fishers sabotaged fishing lines. A lobster pound that did business with Indigenous harvesters was burnt to the ground in a dispute that intensified for weeks and is still unresolved. Yet another painful episode that made 2020 the most trying year in recent memory.
I've never seen anything like it, and I cried too. I don't know anybody who didn't cry.
But sorrow can also inspire. Dimitri Neonakis used his piloting skills to provide consolation. By recording intricate flight paths on GPS, Neonakis created sky drawings, like a heart for Portapic. Flying hundreds of kilometers for each artistic tribute, he spelled out Jen Casey's name. And he traced an anchor in the sky for yet another heartbreaking disaster, December's sinking of a scallop dragger near Digby, which claimed the lives of 6 men. Risking his own safety in poor flying conditions, Neonakis helped raise $60,000 for the men's families.
Those messages from people who lost their parents or lost their brother or sister, messages, they mean a lot to me, those messages. Those are the ones that they hit home.
Another positive is the overall success of Nova Scotia and the Atlantic region in limiting the spread of COVID-19. Grief counselors say moral victories don't erase the impact of unimaginable tragedy.
It's absolutely devastating.
They say time and space are critically important as efforts to heal continue into the new year. Ross Lord, Global News, Halifax.
Still ahead, bidding farewell to 2020, how the world is starting a new year with new hope. New Year's Eve is often a time of reflection, and when we think of 2020, it is going to be remembered for bringing us a pandemic unlike anything we've experienced in our lifetimes before. In one way or another, it's had an impact on us all the world over. For much of the globe, the year has already ended. Redmond Shannon takes a look at how the planet is ringing in 2021.
Normally, Sydney Harbour is thronged with thousands of people for New Year's Eve. But this year, only those with restaurant bookings were allowed up close to see the iconic fireworks.
Normally just crowds of people out, and yeah, it's a bit eerie this evening.
With new virus clusters in the city, authorities asked Aussies to watch from home. Although clearly not everyone listened. The Sensoji Temple bell rang in 2021 in Tokyo, a year the city hopes to host a delayed Olympics. Daily cases of COVID-19 have topped 1,000 in Japan's capital for the first time, and the governor has warned of an explosion of cases. In North Korea, little is known about the extent of the pandemic. The crowds were dense, but absolutely everyone wore their mask above their nose.
Was für ein Jahr liegt hinter uns.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel called 2020 the most difficult of her 15 years in office, taking aim at what she called cruel and dangerous COVID-19 conspiracy theories. In France, an 8 p.m. curfew was in place, with DJ David Guetta playing a fundraising gig from the Louvre.
Je me couche à 8 heures.
This woman said she instead would be in bed by 8, but in true French style, would eat well first. In London, the traditional party spot of Trafalgar Square opposite Canada House is off limits. Most of the UK is in hard lockdown. YouTube UK has an online party hosted by Canadian comedian Catherine Ryan.
Join me with a few of my friends.
Somewhat optimistically encouraging young people to party at home. But wait, there is hope. Jump back to the very start of the day. Auckland, New Zealand. No masks, no worries. Effectively COVID-free. A sign of what next New Year's Eve could be like for all of us. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
And that is Global National for this Thursday night and for 2020. I'm Sonia Dion. For our final goodbye, we're going to go out in style. These goats are milking the party for all it's worth, bleating in the new year from their home in Tennessee. Rumour has it they'll be dancing to Billy Vanilli tonight. On behalf of Dhanraj, Robin and the entire Global National team, wishing you a very safe and happy new year. I'll see you back here tomorrow. Goat night.